Tuck Everlasting, Chapters 6 through 8. Chapter 6. Afterward, when she thought about it, it seemed to Winnie that the next few minutes were only a blur. First, she was kneeling on the ground, insisting on a drink from the spring, and the next thing she knew, she was seized and swung through the air, open-mouthed, and found herself straddling the bouncing back of the fat old horse, with Miles and Jessie trotting along on either side, while May ran puffing ahead, dragging on the bridle. Winnie had often been haunted by visions of what it would be like to be kidnapped, but none of her visions had been like this, with her kidnappers just as alarmed as she was herself. She had always pictured a troop of burly men with long black mustaches who would tumble her into a blanket and bear her off like a sack of potatoes while she pleaded for mercy. But instead it was they, May Tuck and Miles and Jessie, who were pleading. "Please, child, dear child, don't you be scared." This was May, trying to run and call back over her shoulder at the same time. "We wouldn't harm you for the world. If you'd yelled or anything," this was Jessie, "someone might have heard you, and that's too risky." And Miles said, "We'll explain it as soon as we're far enough away." Winnie herself was speechless. She clung to the saddle and gave herself up to the astonishing fact that, though her heart was pounding and her backbone felt like a pipe full of cold running water, her head was fiercely calm. Disconnected thoughts presented themselves one by one, as if they had been waiting their turn in line. "So this is what it's like to ride a horse. I was going to run away today anyway. What will they say when I'm not there for breakfast? I wish the toad could see me now. That woman is worried about me. Miles is taller than Jessie. I'd better duck if I don't want this next branch to knock me off." They had come to the edge of the wood now, with no sign of slowing their rapid jog. The road, where it angled across the meadow, was just ahead, dazzling white in the open sunlight. And there, standing on the road, was the man from the night before, the man in the yellow suit, his black hat on his head. Discovering him, seeing his surprise and presented at once with choices, Winnie's mind, perversely, went blank. Instead of crying out for help, she merely goggled at him as they fled past the spot where he stood. May Tuck was the only one who spoke, and the most she could offer was, "Teaching our little girl how to ride." Only then did it come to Winnie that she ought to shout, wave her arms, do something. But the man had fallen away by that time, and she was afraid to let go of the saddle, afraid to turn around lest she fall off the horse. In another moment it was too late. They had sped up the hill and down its other side, and the opportunity was lost. After another few minutes, the road led them to a place where, off to the left, a shallow stream looped near, with willows and sheltering, scrubby bushes. "Stop!" cried May. "We'll stop here." Miles and Jessie grabbed at the horse's harness, and he pulled up abruptly, nearly toppling Winnie over his neck. "Lift the poor child down," May gasped, her chest heaving. "We'll go catch our breath by the water and try to put things straight before we go on." But the explanation, once they stumbled to the banks of the stream, came hard. May seemed embarrassed, and Miles and Jessie fidgeted, glancing at their mother uneasily. No one knew how to begin. For her part, Winnie, now that the running was over, began to comprehend what was happening, and with the comprehension her throat closed and her mouth went dry as paper. This was no vision. This was real. Strangers were taking her away. They might do anything. She might never see her mother again. And then, thinking of her mother, she saw herself as small, weak, and helpless, and she began to cry suddenly, crushed as much by outrage as by shock. May Tuck's round face wrinkled in dismay. "Dear Lord, don't cry. Please don't cry, child," she implored. "We're not bad people. Truly we're not. We had to bring you away. You'll see why in a minute, and we'll take you back just as soon as we can. Tomorrow, I promise." When May said tomorrow, Winnie's sobs turned to wails. Tomorrow? It was like being told she would be kept away forever. She wanted to go home now, at once, rush back to the safety of her fence and her mother's voice from the window. May reached out to her, but she twisted away, her hands over her face, and gave herself up to weeping. "This is awful," said Jessie. "Can't you do something, Ma? The poor little tad." "We ought to have had some better plan than this," said Miles. "That's the truth," said May helplessly. "The dear Lord knows there's been time enough to think of one, and it had to happen sooner or later. We've been plain bone lucky it hasn't happened before, but I never expected it'd be a child." She reached distractedly into the pocket of her skirt and took out the music box, and, without thinking, twisted the winding key with trembling fingers. When the tinkling little melody began, Winnie's sobbing slowed. She stood by the stream, her hands still over her face, and listened. Yes, it was the same music she had heard the night before. Somehow it calmed her. It was like a ribbon tying her to the familiar things. She thought, "When I get home, I'll tell Granny it wasn't elf music after all." She wiped her face as well as she could with her wet hands and turned to May. "That's the music I heard last night," she managed between recovering snuffles, "when I was out in my yard. My Granny said it was elves." "Dear me, no," said May, peering at her hopefully. "It's only my music box. I didn't suppose anyone could hear it." She held it out to Winnie. "Do you want to take a look at it?" "It's pretty," said Winnie, taking the little box and turning it over in her hands. The winding key was still revolving, but more and more slowly. The melody faltered. Another few widely spaced notes plinked, and then it stopped. "Wind it up if you want to," said May, "clockwise." Winnie turned the key. It clicked faintly, and then, after several more turns, the music began to play again, brisk from its fresh winding, and merry. No one who owned a thing like this could be too disagreeable. Winnie examined the painted roses and lilies of the valley, and smiled in spite of herself. "It's pretty," she repeated, handing it back to May. The music box had relaxed them all. Miles dragged a handkerchief from a back pocket and mopped at his face, and May sank down heavily on a rock, pulling off the blue straw hat and fanning herself with it. "Look here, Winnie Foster," said Jessie. "We're friends, we really are, but you gotta help us. Come sit down, and we'll try to tell you why." Chapter 7. It was the strangest story Winnie had ever heard. She soon suspected they had never told it before, except to each other, that she was their first real audience, for they gathered around her like children at their mother's knee, each trying to claim her attention, and sometimes they all talked at once and interrupted each other in their eagerness. 87 years before, the Tucks had come from a long way to the east, looking for a place to settle. In those days, the wood was not a wood. It was a forest, just as her grandmother had said. A forest that went on and on and on. They had thought they would start a farm as soon as they came to the end of the trees. But the trees never seemed to end. When they came to the part that was now the wood, and turned from the trail to find a camping place, they happened on the spring. "It was real nice," said Jessie with a sigh. "It looked just the way it does now. A clearing, lots of sunshine, that big tree with all those knobby roots. We stopped and everyone took a drink, even the horse." "No," said May, "the cat didn't drink. That's important." "Yes," said Miles, "don't leave that out. We all had a drink, except for the cat." "Well, anyway," Jessie went on, "the water tasted sort of strange. But we camped there overnight, and Pa carved a T on the tree trunk to mark where we'd been, and then we went on." They had come out of the forest at last, many miles to the west, had found a thinly populated valley, had started their farm. "We put up a house for Ma and Pa," said Miles, "and a little shack for Jessie and me. We figured we'd be starting families of our own pretty soon, and would want our own houses." "That was the first time we figured there was something peculiar," said May. "Jessie fell out of a tree." "I was way up in the middle," Jessie interrupted, "trying to saw off some of the big branches before we cut her down. I lost my balance and I fell." "He landed plumb on his head," said May with a shudder. "We thought for sure he broke his neck, but come to find out, it didn't hurt him a bit." "Not long after," Miles went on, "some hunters came by one day at sunset. The horse was out grazing by some trees and they shot him. Mistook him for a deer, they said. Can you fancy that? But the thing is, they didn't kill him. The bullet went right on through him and didn't hardly even leave a mark. Then Pa got a snake bite, and Jessie ate the poisoned toadstools. And I cut myself," said May, "remember, slicing bread?" But it was the passage of time that worried them the most. They had worked the farm, settled down, made friends. But after 10 years, then 20, they had to face the fact that there was something terribly wrong. None of them was getting any older. "I was more'n 40 by then," said Miles sadly. "I was married. I had 2 children. But from the look of me, I was still 22. My wife, she finally made up her mind I'd sold my soul to the devil. She left me. She went away and she took the children with her." "I'm glad I never got married," Jessie put in. "It was the same with our friends," said May. "They come to pull back from us. There was talk about witchcraft, black magic. Well, you can hardly blame them, but finally we had to leave the farm. We didn't know where to go. We started back the way we come, just wandering. We was like gypsies. When we got this far, it changed, of course. A lot of the trees was gone. There was people, and Tree Gap, it was a new village. The road was here, but in those days it was mostly just a cow path. We went on into what was left of the wood to make a camp, and when we got to the clearing and the tree and the spring, we remembered it from before." "It hadn't changed, no more'n we had," said Miles, "and that was how we found out. Pa'd carved a T on the tree, remember, 20 years before? But the T was just where it'd been when he'd done it. The tree hadn't grown one whit in all that time. It was exactly the same. And the T he'd carved was as fresh as if he'd just put it there." Then they had remembered drinking the water. They and the horse. But not the cat. The cat had lived a long and happy life on the farm, but had died some 10 years before. So they decided at last that the source of their changelessness was the spring. When we come to that conclusion, May went on, "Tuck said, that's my husband, Angus Tuck, he said he had to be sure once and for all. He took his shotgun and he pointed it at himself the best way he could, and before we could stop him, he pulled the trigger." There was a long pause. May's fingers, laced together in her lap, twisted with the tension of remembering. At last she said, "The shot knocked him down. Went into his heart, it had to, the way he aimed. And right on through him. It scarcely even left a mark. Just like you shot a bullet through water. And he was just the same as if he'd never done it." "After that we went sort of crazy," said Jessie, grinning at the memory. "Heck, we was going to live forever. Can you picture what it felt like to find that out?" "But then we sat down and talked it over," said Miles. "We're still talking it over," Jessie added. "And we figured it'd be really bad if everyone knew about that spring," said May. "We begun to see what it would mean." She peered at Winnie. "Do you understand, child, that water, it stops you right where you are. If you'd had a drink today, you'd stay a little girl forever. You'd never grow up, not ever." "We don't know how it works or even why," said Miles. "Pa thinks it's something left over from some other plan for the way the world should be," said Jessie. "Some plan that didn't work out too good, and so everything was changed, except that the spring was passed over somehow or other. Maybe he's right, I don't know. But you see, Winnie Foster, when I told you before I'm 104 years old, I was telling the truth. But I'm really only 17. And so far as I know, I'll stay 17 till the end of the world." Chapter 8. Winnie did not believe in fairy tales. She had never longed for a magic wand, did not expect to marry a prince, and was scornful, most of the time, of her grandmother's elves. So now she sat, mouth open, wide-eyed, not knowing what to make of this extraordinary story. It couldn't, not a bit of it, be true. And yet, It feels so fine to tell somebody, Jessie exploded. Just think, Winnie Foster, you're the only person in the world, besides us, who knows about it. Hold on now, said Miles cautiously. Maybe not. There might be a whole lot of others, for all we know, wandering around just like us. Maybe, but we don't know them, Jessie pointed out. We've never had anyone but us to talk to about it. Winnie, isn't it peculiar and kind of wonderful? Just think of all the things we've seen in the world. All the things we're going to see. That kind of talk will make her want to rush back and drink a gallon of the stuff, warned Miles. There's a whole lot more to it, more to it than Jessie Tuck's good times, you know. Ah, stuff, said Jessie with a shrug. We might as well enjoy it, long as we can't change it. You don't have to be such a parson all the time. I'm not being a parson, said Miles. I just think you ought to take it more serious. Now, boys, said May. She was kneeling by the stream, splashing her face and hands with cool water. Whew! Such weather, she exclaimed, sitting back on her heels. She unfastened the brooch, took off her shawl, and toweled her dripping face. Well, child, she said to Winnie, standing up, now you share our secret. It's a big, dangerous secret. We gotta have your help to keep it. I expect you're full of questions, but we can't stay here no longer. She tied the shawl around her waist, then, and sighed. Pains me to think how your ma and pa will worry, but there's just no way around it. We gotta take you home with us. That's the plan. Tuck, he'll want to talk it out. Make sure you see why you can't tell no one. But we'll bring you back tomorrow. All right? And all three of them looked at her hopefully. All right, said Winnie. For she decided there wasn't any choice. She would have to go. They would probably make her go anyway, and no matter what she said. But she felt there was nothing to be afraid of, not really. For they seemed gentle. Gentle and, in a strange way, childlike. They made her feel old. And the way they spoke to her, the way they looked at her, made her feel special, important. It was a warm, spreading feeling, entirely new. She liked it, and in spite of their story, she liked them, too, especially Jessie. But it was Miles who took her hand and said, It's really fine to have you along, even if it's only for a day or two. Then Jessie gave a great whoop and leapt into the stream, splashing mightily. What'd you bring for breakfast, Ma? He cried. We can eat on the way, can't we? I'm starving. So, with the sun riding high now in the sky, they started off again, noisy in the August stillness, eating bread and cheese. Jessie sang funny old songs in a loud voice and swung like a monkey from the branches of trees, showing off shamelessly for Winnie, calling to her, Hey, Winnie Foster, watch me, and look what I can do. And Winnie, laughing at them, lost the last of her alarm. They were friends, her friends. She was running away after all, but she was not alone. Closing the gate on her oldest fears as she had closed the gate of her own fenced yard, she discovered the wings she'd always wished she'd had. And all at once she was elated. Where were the terrors she'd been told she should expect? She could not recognize them anywhere. The sweet earth opened out its wide four corners to her like the petals of a flower ready to be picked, and it shimmered with light and possibility till she was dizzy with it. Her mother's voice, the feel of home, receded for the moment, and her thoughts turned forward. Why, she too might live forever in this remarkable world she was only now just discovering. The story of the spring, it might be true, so that when she was not rolling along on the back of the fat old horse, by choice this time, she ran shouting down the road, her arms flung out, making more noise than anybody. It was good. So good, in fact, that through it all, not one of them noticed that the man they had passed on the road, the man in the yellow suit, had crept up to the bushes by the stream and heard it all, the whole fantastic story. Nor did they notice that he was following now, beside the road far behind, his mouth, above the thin gray beard, turned ever so slightly toward a smile.